Imagine a bird sitting comfortably inside a cage. Every day it receives food. Every day it feels safe. Every day it believes the cage is its home. Then one day the cage door suddenly breaks. The bird becomes terrified. Everything familiar is gone. Everything secure disappears. But what the bird calls a disaster is actually freedom. Sometimes Allah breaks the cage of comfort around certain people. He removes what they depended on. He allows loneliness, he allows confusion, he allows painful endings, not to destroy them, but to teach them how to fly toward him. And perhaps the thing you call a loss today is actually the first sign that Allah is preparing you for a higher destiny. When Allah chooses you for a higher destiny, He first makes you feel like a stranger in this world. Have you ever wondered why you no longer feel comfortable with the things that once excited you? The conversations that once entertained you now feel empty. The goals that once consumed your thoughts no longer satisfy your heart. The things people spend years chasing seem unable to give you the peace you are searching for. And perhaps the strangest part is that you cannot fully explain why. From the outside, your life may look normal. You smile, you work, you speak to people, you continue moving forward. But deep inside, there is a feeling that something has changed. It is as if your soul is looking for something this world cannot give. Many people experience this season and immediately assume something is wrong with them. They think they are becoming too emotional, too sensitive, too disconnected. But the people of spiritual insight understood something profound. Sometimes this feeling is not a sign that you are lost. Sometimes it is a sign that Allah is guiding you. Ibn Arabi and many of the great spiritual teachers spoke about how Allah prepares certain souls differently from others. Before Allah raises a servant spiritually, He often changes what that servant finds attractive. The things that once seemed important begin to lose their shine. Not because those things suddenly changed, but because your heart is changing. Allah is preparing your soul to seek something higher. The reality is that every human being is searching for peace. Some search for it in wealth. Some search for it in relationships. Some search for it in status and recognition. But there comes a moment for certain people when Allah allows them to see that none of these things can fully satisfy the heart. That realization can feel lonely, because while everyone else appears satisfied, chasing temporary things, your heart keeps searching for something deeper. You may even feel like a stranger among your own friends, a stranger among people who think exactly the way you once thought. But this feeling of being a stranger is not always a punishment. In many cases, it is preparation. Allah is slowly removing the attachment your heart has to temporary things so that your heart can become attached to what is eternal. And this process is rarely comfortable. The soul does not easily let go of what it has loved for years. That is why this stage often feels confusing. You cannot return to the person you used to be. But you have not yet become the person Allah is preparing you to become. You are standing between two worlds. One foot in your old life, one foot moving toward Allah. And that space between the two can feel incredibly lonely. Yet it is often within this loneliness that the greatest transformations begin. Because when the noise of the world becomes less attractive, the voice of the soul becomes easier to hear. When worldly distractions lose their power, the heart begins to awaken. And when the heart awakens, it starts longing for its true home. Perhaps the strange feeling you have been carrying is not a sign that Allah has abandoned you. Perhaps it is the exact opposite. Perhaps Allah is choosing you for a higher destiny. And before He brings you closer to Himself, He first allows you to realize that this world was never meant to be your final destination. The strange way Allah breaks your heart free from everything except Himself. Have you ever loved something so deeply that you could not imagine your life without it? Perhaps it was a person. Perhaps it was a dream you spent years building. Perhaps it was a future you pictured so clearly in your mind that it felt guaranteed. Then suddenly, everything changed. The person left, the opportunity disappeared, the dream collapsed, and the pain felt unbearable. You prayed for answers. You searched for reasons. You replayed every moment in your mind, wondering what you could have done differently. And perhaps the most painful question of all was this: why would Allah allow me to love something so much only to take it away? Many people spend years trapped inside that question. They see the loss, but they never see the wisdom hidden behind it. What the people of spiritual insight understood is that Allah sometimes removes things from your life, not because He wants to hurt you, but because He wants to save you. The human heart was created to love, but sometimes that love becomes misplaced. Sometimes we become so attached to a person that our happiness depends on them. Sometimes we become so attached to a dream that our identity depends on it. Sometimes we become so attached to worldly things that we forget the one who gave them to us. And when that happens, those blessings slowly become veils. Instead of leading us closer to Allah, they begin pulling our hearts away from Him. This is why certain losses feel so painful. The pain is often proportional to the attachment. The tighter the grip, the deeper the wound when it is removed. But here is the strange reality. Allah sees what you cannot see. He knows when your heart is becoming imprisoned by something temporary. He knows when your soul is depending on creation more than the Creator. And because He loves you, He sometimes removes what is standing between you and Him. At first it feels like destruction. You feel broken, you feel abandoned, you feel as though your world is falling apart. But over time, something remarkable begins to happen. The thing you lost stops occupying every thought. The person you thought you could never live without slowly becomes a memory. The dream you thought defined your future loses its power over your emotions. And in the empty space left behind, something new begins to grow. Your dependence upon Allah, your conversations with Allah become deeper. Your prayers become more sincere. Your trust becomes stronger. You begin turning to Allah not because life is easy, but because He is the only one who remains when everything else disappears. Ibn Arabi taught that sometimes what feels like separation is actually a form of divine mercy. Allah removes one attachment so He can replace it with something infinitely greater. Not always another person, not always another opportunity, but a deeper awareness of Him. And there is no gift greater than that. One day, many people look back at the very thing that broke them and realize it was the beginning of their spiritual awakening. The heartbreak they feared became the doorway. The loss they hated became the teacher. The pain they resisted became the reason they found Allah in a way they never had before. Sometimes Allah breaks your heart free from everything except Himself, because He knows that only in Him will your heart finally find peace. Why Allah removes people, comfort and certainty before He elevates you. There are seasons in life when it feels like everything familiar is disappearing at once. People you trusted walk away. Doors you expected to open remain closed. Plans you spent years building suddenly collapse. The future becomes unclear. And for the first time in a long time, you realize how little control you truly have. These seasons are among the most difficult experiences a person can face, because the human soul naturally seeks security. We want predictable outcomes. We want stable relationships. We want guarantees. We want certainty. Yet when Allah intends to raise certain people spiritually, He often begins by removing the very things they rely upon most. At first, this makes no sense. You wonder why life feels harder instead of easier. You wonder why things are being taken away instead of added. You wonder why Allah is allowing instability when all you want is peace. But there is a hidden wisdom behind this process. Comfort can sometimes become a prison, not because comfort is evil, but because comfort can make us forget our dependence upon Allah. When everything is going exactly as planned, many people stop seeking Allah with urgency. They become dependent upon their routines, their savings, their relationships, their abilities, their plans. Without realizing it, they begin trusting these things more than the one who controls them. This is why Allah sometimes shakes the foundations beneath His servants, not to destroy them, but to teach them where true security comes from. The reality is that every worldly support is temporary. People change, circumstances change, health changes, wealth changes, life changes. Only Allah remains constant. And Allah wants certain servants to learn this truth deeply, not merely understand it intellectually. That is why He allows them to experience seasons where nothing feels certain except Him. Those seasons are painful, but they are transformative. Because when every other support disappears, you begin discovering strengths you never knew existed. You learn how to trust Allah when there is no visible solution. You learn how to continue walking when you cannot see the destination. You learn how to believe in Allah's wisdom even when you cannot understand His plan. This is the training ground of spiritual elevation. Many people want the rank without the preparation. They want the closeness to Allah without the purification. They want the wisdom without the struggle. But Allah prepares His chosen servants differently. Before elevation comes emptiness. Before clarity comes confusion. Before strength comes weakness. Before certainty in Allah comes uncertainty in everything else. And perhaps that is why some of the greatest spiritual transformations begin during the most uncomfortable chapters of life. The chapter where people leave. The chapter where plans fail. The chapter where certainty disappears. Because those chapters force the soul to discover what it should have depended on all along. Not people, not plans, not worldly security, but Allah alone. And when a servant reaches that level of trust, Allah begins opening doors that could never have been opened before. When Allah hides you from the world to prepare you for something greater. One of the most difficult experiences for the human heart is feeling unnoticed. You work hard, yet nobody sees your effort. You struggle quietly, yet nobody understands your pain. You try to improve yourself, yet it feels like everyone else is moving ahead while you remain in the same place. Sometimes you look around and wonder why others are receiving attention, opportunities, and recognition while you continue waiting. And if you are honest with yourself, there may be moments when this hurts more than you would like to admit, because every human being wants to feel valued. Every human being wants to feel seen. Every human being wants to know that their efforts matter. But there is a strange reality that the people closest to Allah often discover. Not every season is meant for visibility. Some seasons are meant for preparation. Many people believe elevation begins when the world notices them. The people of spiritual wisdom understood that true elevation often begins when Allah hides you from the world. Think about a seed buried beneath the soil. To someone looking from the outside, nothing appears to be happening. The seed is hidden, forgotten, invisible. Yet beneath the surface, a transformation is taking place. Roots are growing. Strength is developing. Life is being prepared. And if the seed were exposed too early, it would never become the tree it was created to be. The same is often true for the human soul. Allah sometimes places His servants in seasons of obscurity because He is developing qualities that cannot grow under constant attention. Patience grows in hidden places. Sincerity grows in hidden places. Trust grows in hidden places. Humility grows in hidden places. When nobody is applauding you, you discover whether you are doing good for people or for Allah. When nobody notices your sacrifices, you discover the true intention behind your actions. When nobody praises your efforts, you learn how to continue seeking Allah's pleasure alone. This is why hidden seasons are so valuable. They reveal what public success often conceals. Many people appear successful in front of others, but remain spiritually weak inside. Allah wants more for certain servants. He wants to strengthen them from within before exposing them to greater responsibilities. Because attention is a test, recognition is a test, influence is a test, and not every soul is ready to carry those tests immediately. Sometimes Allah delays visibility because He is protecting you from pride, protecting you from distraction, protecting you from becoming attached to people's opinions. You may think you are being forgotten, but in reality, Allah is shaping you. You may think your life is standing still, but in reality, Allah is building foundations that will support what comes next. The hidden years are often the years that matter most. The tears nobody saw, the prayers nobody heard, the struggles nobody understood, the sacrifices nobody appreciated. These moments are never wasted with Allah. Every sincere act is recorded, every patient moment is known, every lonely night is witnessed. And one day you may look back and realize that the period you thought was holding you back was actually preparing you for everything Allah intended to give you. The world measures progress by visibility. Allah measures progress by transformation. And sometimes the greatest thing Allah can do for a servant is hide them until their heart is ready for what is coming. What feels like delay may actually be divine preparation. What feels like obscurity may actually be protection. And what feels like being forgotten may be one of the clearest signs that Allah is carefully preparing you for something greater than you can currently imagine. The secret of divine loneliness that only certain souls experience. There is a type of loneliness that comes from being physically alone. But there is another type of loneliness that can exist even when you are surrounded by people. You sit with family. You spend time with friends. You speak with others throughout the day. Yet deep inside, there is a feeling that remains difficult to explain, a feeling that something is missing, a feeling that your soul is searching for something beyond what this world can offer. Many people try to escape this feeling. They fill every moment with noise. They keep themselves constantly distracted. They move from one source of entertainment to another. They surround themselves with people. They stay busy, not because they are happy, but because they are afraid of being alone with their own hearts. Yet certain souls are taken on a different journey. Allah allows them to experience a deeper form of loneliness, not to harm them, not to abandon them, but to awaken them. Because sometimes loneliness is the language Allah uses to call a servant closer. When every worldly distraction loses its power to satisfy you, your heart begins searching for its true source of peace. And that search changes everything. At first, this loneliness feels painful. You wonder why people do not understand you. You wonder why conversations feel empty. You wonder why things that seem to satisfy others no longer satisfy you. You may even question yourself. But the reality is that your soul is beginning to recognize a truth that many people spend their entire lives avoiding. No created thing can permanently satisfy the heart. Not wealth, not success, not relationships, not status, not recognition. These things may bring temporary happiness, but they cannot fill the deepest longing of the soul. Only Allah can do that. This is why many of the righteous servants of Allah experienced periods of isolation and deep reflection. They discovered something extraordinary within those moments. When the noise of creation becomes quieter, the presence of the Creator becomes easier to notice. When distractions lose their grip, remembrance becomes sweeter. When worldly attachments weaken, spiritual awareness grows. The loneliness that once felt frightening begins transforming into something beautiful. Instead of feeling empty, the heart begins feeling connected. Instead of feeling abandoned, the heart begins feeling accompanied by Allah. Instead of fearing silence, the soul begins finding comfort within it. Ibn Arabi often emphasized that the journey to Allah is ultimately an inward journey, a journey beyond appearances, a journey beyond worldly attachments, a journey into deeper awareness of divine reality, and that journey frequently begins with loneliness. Not because Allah wants His servants to suffer, but because He wants them to discover what cannot be found anywhere else. The greatest tragedy is not being alone. The greatest tragedy is being surrounded by everything this world offers, while remaining distant from Allah. And the greatest blessing is not having everything you desire. The greatest blessing is finding Allah so deeply that even when you stand alone, your heart feels complete. This is the secret of divine loneliness. It is not the loneliness of abandonment. It is the loneliness of preparation, the loneliness that slowly detaches the soul from temporary things and teaches it how to rest in the presence of Allah. And once a servant experiences that closeness, they begin to understand why Allah allowed them to walk through those lonely seasons in the first place. Because those lonely nights were never empty. They were invitations, invitations from Allah to draw nearer to Him than ever before. Why your darkest seasons may be the greatest sign of Allah's love. There are moments in life when everything feels heavy. The prayer that once brought comfort feels difficult. The future feels uncertain. The answers you desperately seek refuse to come. And no matter how much strength you try to gather, the burden seems greater than what you can carry. Perhaps you are living through such a season right now. A season where one hardship follows another. A season where the doors you hoped would open remain closed. A season where you wonder why your journey feels so much harder than the journeys of those around you. And if you are honest, there may be nights when you quietly ask yourself a painful question. Why is Allah allowing this to happen to me? The human mind naturally assumes that ease is a sign of favor and hardship is a sign of rejection. But the people of spiritual wisdom understood that this is not always true. Some of the people most beloved to Allah lived through the greatest hardships. The prophets faced trials that would have broken ordinary people, yet they remained the most beloved servants of Allah. This alone should force us to rethink the way we view our struggles. Not every hardship is punishment. Not every delay is rejection. Not every closed door is a sign that Allah has turned away from you. Sometimes the exact opposite is happening. Sometimes Allah is drawing you closer through the very difficulty you are trying to escape. Think about how gold is purified. It enters the fire carrying impurities. The heat is intense. The process is uncomfortable. Yet without the fire, the gold never reaches its highest purity. The soul follows a similar path. Allah allows certain servants to walk through spiritual fires that remove pride, arrogance, dependence on creation, and attachment to worldly things. At first, all you notice is the pain. You notice what was taken. You notice what was delayed. You notice what was denied. But Allah notices what is being built. He sees the patience developing inside you. He sees the humility growing within your heart. He sees the sincerity emerging from your struggles. He sees a stronger servant being formed through every difficult moment. This is why some of the greatest spiritual transformations happen during the darkest chapters of life. Before the trial, you may have remembered Allah occasionally. During the trial, He becomes your refuge. Before the hardship, your prayers may have been routine. During the hardship, every word comes from the depths of your soul. Before the darkness, your trust may have been theoretical. During the darkness, trust becomes your lifeline. The strange reality is that many people meet Allah most deeply through pain. Not because pain itself is beautiful, but because pain removes distractions. Pain strips away illusions. Pain reveals what truly matters. And sometimes, Allah loves a servant so much that He refuses to leave them attached to things that will ultimately disappoint them. Instead, He guides them toward Himself. even if the journey requires tears, even if the journey requires loneliness, even if the journey requires years of uncertainty. One day, many believers look back on the hardest period of their lives and realize something shocking. The season they wanted to escape was actually the season that brought them closest to Allah. The darkness they feared became the reason they found a light they never knew existed, and suddenly they understand. Allah was not abandoning them, He was preparing them. The hardship was not proof of distance, it was proof of divine attention. Because sometimes the greatest sign of Allah's love is not the blessing you receive. Sometimes it is the trial that transforms your soul forever. The moment you realize every pain, delay, and loss was leading you to Allah. Imagine looking back at your life many years from now. Imagine seeing every chapter at once, every success, every disappointment, every prayer, every heartbreak, every delay, every loss. Imagine seeing the complete picture that Allah has always seen while you could only see a single page. What do you think you would discover? You would probably realize that many of the things you desperately wanted would have harmed you. You would probably realize that many of the things you cried over were never meant for you. You would probably realize that some of your greatest blessings arrived disguised as painful endings. But right now, while living inside the story, it is difficult to see that, because pain narrows our vision. When something hurts, we focus on what we lost. When a door closes, we focus on the opportunity that disappeared. When a prayer seems delayed, we focus on the waiting. We rarely see the wisdom unfolding behind the scenes. Yet Allah sees everything. He sees every path you could have taken. He sees every consequence you cannot predict. He sees every hidden danger. He sees every hidden blessing. And because His knowledge is perfect, His plan is perfect. The challenge is that the human heart wants immediate understanding. We want explanations now. We want clarity now. We want answers now. But Allah often reveals His wisdom gradually. Sometimes years pass before we understand why something happened. Sometimes an entire chapter must end before its purpose becomes visible. This is why trust is such a central part of the spiritual journey. Trust means believing that Allah knows what He is doing even when you do not. Trust means continuing forward when the road ahead is unclear. Trust means accepting that Allah's vision is greater than your own. There are people who once cried because a relationship ended. Years later, they thank Allah for protecting them. There are people who once cried because an opportunity disappeared. Years later, they discover that losing it redirected them towards something far better. There are people who once questioned Allah's wisdom during difficult seasons. Years later, they realize those seasons shaped the strongest version of themselves. The same may be true for you. The thing that currently confuses you may one day become the very thing you thank Allah for. The delay that frustrates you today may protect you from a future you cannot see. The loss that broke your heart may open the door to a deeper relationship with Allah. And perhaps that is the greatest secret of all. The ultimate purpose of every experience is not simply to give you worldly success. The ultimate purpose is to bring you closer to your Lord. Some people move toward Allah through blessings. Others move toward Allah through trials. But both roads lead to the same destination. Looking back, you may eventually discover that every pain carried a lesson. Every delay carried wisdom. Every loss carried mercy. Every hardship carried guidance. And every difficult chapter was quietly leading you toward Allah. What felt like random events were actually part of a divine plan. What felt like broken pieces were actually pieces of a greater design. And what felt like the end of your story was often the beginning of your return to Allah. That is when peace finally enters the heart. Not because every question has been answered, but because you realize that Allah was guiding you all along. How Allah quietly turns broken servants into His closest friends. One of the greatest misunderstandings people have about spiritual closeness to Allah is believing that it belongs only to the strongest people. People often imagine that the closest servants of Allah are those who never struggle, those who never cry, those who never feel weak, those who never experience moments of doubt, fear, or heartbreak. But when you study the lives of the righteous, you discover something very different. You discover that many of the people closest to Allah were first brought to a place of complete helplessness, a place where they realized they could no longer rely on their own strength, a place where every illusion of control had been stripped away, a place where they finally understood how desperately they needed Allah. And perhaps that is the strange way Allah prepares certain people. He does not always begin by making them stronger. Sometimes He begins by making them aware of their weakness, because as long as a servant believes he can carry life alone, he will never fully surrender to Allah. As long as he believes his intelligence, wealth, status, connections, or abilities are enough, part of his heart remains attached to himself. But there comes a moment for certain souls when Allah lovingly removes these illusions, not to humiliate them, not to destroy them, but to bring them closer. The servant loses something, a relationship, a dream, a plan, a source of security, and suddenly he realizes how fragile he truly is. The future no longer feels guaranteed. The answers no longer seem obvious. The confidence he once had begins to disappear. And for the first time, he falls before Allah with complete sincerity, not because he is trying to impress anyone, not because he wants people to see his worship, but because his soul has nowhere else to go. This is where transformation begins, because there is a difference between knowing Allah exists and truly needing Allah. Many people know about Allah. Few people reach the point where every part of their being depends upon Him. That dependence is one of the greatest gifts Allah can give a servant. It is the doorway through which true closeness enters the heart. Ibn Arabi spoke about the journey of the soul returning to its Lord, a journey where layers of ego slowly fall away, a journey where pride is replaced by humility, a journey where self-reliance is replaced by trust, a journey where worldly attachments are replaced by divine love. But this journey rarely happens during comfort. It usually happens during breaking, because brokenness has a way of revealing truths that success often hides. When life is easy, people can become distracted. When life is comfortable, people can become forgetful. When life is going according to plan, people can begin believing they are in control. But when everything falls apart, reality becomes clear. You realize how dependent you are upon Allah. You realize how temporary this world is. You realize how quickly circumstances can change. And most importantly, you realize that Allah is the only one who never leaves. People leave, opportunities leave, health leaves, youth leaves, wealth leaves, status leaves, but Allah remains. Allah remains when the room becomes empty. Allah remains when the tears begin falling. Allah remains when nobody understands what you are carrying. Allah remains when every worldly support disappears. And the servant who discovers this reality begins experiencing a peace that cannot be explained. Not because life suddenly becomes easy, but because his heart finally knows where to turn. The pain may still exist, the challenges may still exist, the uncertainty may still exist, yet beneath all of it there is a quiet certainty, a certainty that Allah is enough. This is why many of the people closest to Allah have stories filled with hardship, because their hardships became the road that led them home. The breaking was never the end. The breaking was the beginning. The loss was never the punishment. The loss was the invitation. The loneliness was never abandonment. The loneliness was preparation. And one day, the servant looks back at every difficult chapter and realizes something extraordinary. Every wound pushed him toward Allah. Every disappointment taught him trust. Every delay taught him patience. Every hardship purified his heart, every tear softened his soul, and every moment of weakness became part of Allah's plan to make him stronger in the only way that truly matters, closer to Allah. That is the strange way Allah prepares certain people. He breaks what the world sees as strength, so he can build what the heavens recognize as true greatness. And through that process, an ordinary servant slowly becomes one of Allah's closest friends. O Allah, if you are preparing us for something greater, then give us the patience to trust you before we understand you. Ya Allah, remove from our hearts every attachment that takes us away from you, and fill our souls with love for you alone. Turn our hardships into purification, our loneliness into closeness to you, and our tears into a means of elevation. Ya Allah, when we feel lost, remind us that you are guiding us. When we feel broken, remind us that you are shaping us. When we feel abandoned, remind us that you are nearer to us than we can imagine. Grant us hearts that are content with your decree, tongues that remember you often, and souls that meet you while you are pleased with us. Ameen.